Hi everyone, welcome to another Plenty workshop hosted by 11 Spoonfuls. I'm Sarah Andrus, I'm a registered dietitian. I spend most of my working hours at Newton Wellesley Hospital as their outpatient dietitian, but I also enjoy teaching nutrition classes. I want to preface, as I normally do, with the fact that I am not a chef, so I don't have any formal culinary training. I learned some throughout dietitian training and schooling, but if I can make these recipes and most people can. So I like to keep them simple, but I also hope that you learn something along the way, maybe a different technique, maybe a different food item to use in replace of another. So that's the goal of these workshops. And then with each of them, I have provided a recipe and ingredient list. So feel free to follow along. You can hit pause, rewind, all of that. I prep sometimes a few dishes ahead of time. So in terms of today, we're going to be doing two different recipes. The first one we're going to start with is Delicata squash because it'll roast in the oven while we're preparing the other recipe. So it's a good time management and skill and efficiency in the kitchen. So I always like, if I'm putting something in the oven, I always like to do that first, prep that so that you can do whatever you need to do on the stove top or wherever else while that's cooking. So the second recipe is going to be a twist on a breakfast taco, and so I'll get to that a little bit later. So first we're going to do the Delicata squash. So Delicata squash looks like this. This is a smaller one, but it's yellow with either green or slightly orange lines. If it has orange lines, I think it's a little bit sweeter. It's a little bit more ripe, but most commonly you see them with these green lines. And what I love about Delicata squash compared to other squashes is that you can eat the skin. So other squashes like spaghetti squash or pumpkin or other ones, you have to either scoop out from the inside and only eat that, or you have to peel the skin off, like a butternut squash, for example. You have to peel the skin off, which is very labor intensive. This, you just leave the skin right on. What that also means is that it's higher in fiber because you have the skin as well. So the first thing that you want to do, because we're eating the skin, is you want to wash this. So other squashes you don't really need to because you're not eating the skin, but this you want to wash, you want to scrub off any dirt, grime, etc. So I've already done that. We will need to scoop out the seeds, and you can keep them and roast them later if you want. I'm not going to for the sake of this video, but they work just like pumpkin seeds or other squash seeds, where you can douse them in olive oil or a little bit of butter and put them in the oven at like 400 and heat for usually 15 to 20 minutes, rotating occasionally. So you can do that with this as well. So I have a sharp knife and a cutting board and my Delicata squash. So first I'm going to just cut off the ends because you don't want to eat the ends, and toss those. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to lay it on edge, and I'm going to cut through here just so that it has an actual edge to it. I want to be careful. This is not really great for kids to do. It's better to have an adult do this because it can be a little bit tough to get through. So now, as you can see, I have some of these seeds in there. So I'm just going to take a spoon. I'm going to grab one over here. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to just scoop out these seeds. And again, you can save them for the sake of time. I'm not going to do that for today. But you would want to get out some of the other, you would just want the seeds if you're going to roast them. You wouldn't want some of the inner flesh. I'm taking out a little bit of the flesh, but not much of it because you're going to be eating most of that flesh. But some of the brighter orange, it's a little bit slimy, for lack of a better word. You want to take that out a little bit. It has a consistency similar to pumpkin. And so we want it to cook evenly, and so we're going to just get rid of some of that. That's a little bit more wet. Throw that away. And then I'm going to do the same on the other side. Again, you don't need a serrated spoon or anything like that. If you have a grapefruit spoon that's serrated, that might be a tad easier, but I find that this doesn't take much effort. Just gets a little bit messy with the seeds. All right. So other things that you should be doing right now is preheating your oven to about 400 because they're going to roast in there. My oven is already set at 400, so we didn't have to wait for that. Depending on how powerful your oven is, you might want to crank it up to closer to 425, because what we're trying to do here is we want it to be nice golden brown. The squash will caramelize in the oven. Any squash, delicata, butternut, acorn, any of those will brown up nicely. All right, so have just my seeds out here. Just take a look, make sure this one was a little bit deeper there. All right, I'm gonna just rinse off my hands to get some of that squash kind of meat off. Next thing that I'm gonna do is I'm going to cut these in like half-inch pieces. So I'm gonna make essentially a half moon piece to it. And these are great just to snack on. They're so versatile. They really come out a lot sweeter tasting in the oven. They're a little bit crispy, so you can eat them by themselves. It makes a great side dish. Or, and what I'm gonna do is flip it over on its side so it's more secure. Or you can top it, use it rather as a topping for salads, for soups, for stews or chilies. So you can do it any way you want afterwards, but I usually just use it as a side dish to something. So if I have leftover meat or something from the night before, then I have this with it. It counts as both a starch and a veggie. So if you have diabetes or you're trying to watch your blood sugar, then this will count as a carbohydrate because it is a starchy vegetable. But it also has a good amount of fiber in it, and so it can counteract some of that spike in your blood sugar. It also is a great source of vitamin A. So in another workshop, I had talked about carrots and sweet potatoes and how they're an orange color and they have a lot of vitamin A. Most orange vegetables have a lot of vitamin A. The carotenoid, the vitamin A, gives it its color. So this is no exception. So I now have little half moon pieces here. And what I'm going to do is you could put them in a bowl and mix them with oil. I'm going to do that directly on the pan, actually. So I have a pan, baking sheet, and I've laid out a piece of aluminum foil. That way, when I'm done, I just take the aluminum foil and I throw it in the trash, and it's ready to go. I have a couple little rogue seeds here that I seem to have missed, so I'm just going to get those off. All right, so you want to space these apart so that they don't steam, but they roast. That's kind of key. with any time you're roasting any vegetables, whether it be potatoes or whether it be carrots, you want to make sure that it's spaced out. All right. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to kind of sprinkle over a little bit of spices and some oil. So for oil, I'm going to use a little bit of olive oil. I'm just going to gently shake over that. We're running a little bit low here. So I'll do a little bit of this. So this is just a little bit of canola oil. So you can use olive or canola oil, whatever you want. I'm putting about a tablespoon or so on the dish. And then I'm just going to kind of spread that around. Again, you could put it in a bowl first and mix, but I think it's also just as easy to do it like this. So you want to get the oil all around first, make sure it's covered. So I'm just kind of taking my finger and just kind of dabbing the oil on here, just so that's all covered a little bit. And I'm going to rinse off my hands and I'm going to sprinkle on the spices. So for spices, I have written down that I recommend salt, garlic powder, and paprika or regular pepper. I'm going to just use garlic powder, salt, and pepper. You can use paprika to give it a nice bright color. I use that for sweet potatoes. For today, I've decided to go with a little bit of garlic. If you want them spicy, you could also add a little bit of cayenne pepper. I wouldn't do the red pepper flakes because they won't cling on that well. But what I'm going to do now, actually what I am going to do is I'm going to put this in a bowl to mix it first, because you don't want some that have a lot of salt and no garlic and vice versa. So I'm going to combine these. I'm going to eyeball the amount, but I have written out for you what I think would be good for a medium-sized Delicata squash. Okay. So I'm just going to kind of stir that around and combine. And then I'm going to take it and I'm going to just sprinkle on each one of these. Make sure they're laying down flat. Again, if you wanted to be precise with the oil, you can put these in a small, Delicata squash pieces in a small bowl and mix them around thoroughly with the oil. But if you've seen any of the other workshops that I've led, you know that I like to keep it as simple as possible, fewer dishes, because the problem is that if you make cooking a little bit too labor intensive and cumbersome, you might feel burnt out and then not want to cook as much. So this is something that I want to be able to do if I come home from a long day of work or errands or whatever you're doing during the day. You're kind of tired, but you know that you should still cook a meal rather than order out to save money, to save calories, health, nutrition, right? So this is something that I just want to be able to do right directly onto the pan. All right. So now let me show you what I have. So we have these Delicata squash pieces. Oil, some oil is still on the aluminum foil, but it's all evenly coated on here. And then I've sprinkled one side with the seasoning. So now we're going to put those in here. And I'm going to set the timer first to about 10 to 15 minutes because I want to check them and flip them over because I would like both sides to nicely brown. So I'll set a timer for 10 minutes. And so we'll check on that and flip over. But now we can start on our next dish. So that's Delicata squash. So I'm going to flip over and I'm going to follow along with my own directions just to make sure I don't go too rogue. So the next is the breakfast tacos that I was talking about. So for that, you need tortillas. I'm using corn, but you can also use flour. What I like about corn is that they tend to be a little bit smaller, so they're more portion sized, but they also are whole grain, right? Because they're taking the whole corn kernel and milling it and making it into a flour. Whereas regular wheat flour, sometimes it's just the white flour, so just the starchy part of the wheat that they're making, and then it doesn't have any fiber or it loses a lot of its nutrients. But if you find tortilla that's made with a little bit more of the whole grain, so the whole wheat, then that's fine too. So really, whatever you want. What I also like about tortillas, both corn and flour, is that they're cheap. So you can make them if you want. It's kind of fun to make, but and it's even slightly cheaper. But this whole package just costs a couple dollars, and you get a ton of them in there, usually about 30 or so. So that's one thing that I have out. Another thing that I have out are eggs. That will serve as part one of our protein source for these. So breakfast tacos typically do have eggs, and so this is not a change there. But what breakfast tacos also usually have is some sort of cheesy sauce or sour cream or something that lends to that creaminess. But both of those things have a lot of fat in them, and in particular, a lot of saturated fat. And we're trying to cut down on saturated fat in general when thinking about our health, because saturated fat can lead to a greater risk of heart disease, and that is probably the most common cause of death or disease in our society right now. So anytime we can cut back on saturated fat is a good thing. So instead, we're going to use hummus. I just bought a container of just plain hummus because I like to be able to add my own seasonings to it. But other options that would be good would be garlic hummus if you like the garlicky flavor. Another one would be red pepper hummus. They have so many flavors of hummus out there. It's unbelievable. And I like them all. But for this, I just wanted to go plain. So I just got the original flavor. There's nothing in particular that you should be looking at when you're looking at hummus. You can buy whatever is on sale. You don't need, I bought the bigger container because I go through hummus pretty quickly with, as a snack, I sometimes will dip a cheese stick in it, or I'll carrot sticks or something. So it's a good grab and go source of plant-based protein. But I bought the bigger size because of that. But for this recipe, you only need the smaller container. So I mentioned that it was a plant-based protein, and what that means is that a lot of times when people think about protein, they think about animal products. So they think about things like eggs, they think about meat, like beef, ground beef, steak, poultry, like chicken and turkey, pork, and those are fine on occasion, but try not to eat them every day because, again, they have a lot of saturated fat in them. That's the type of fat that's found in animal products is saturated fat that we just talked about. And they also tend to be a little bit more expensive than plant-based proteins. So there's also protein found in plants, and that would include all types of beans or legumes. So hummus is made out of chickpeas, also known as garbanzo beans, and so that has a lot of protein in it. You can also get it from nuts and seeds, and you can get it from some grains like quinoa. So I like to mix in any sort of plant-based protein as much as I can, because not only is it often cheaper and it has less saturated fat, but it also has fiber, and no animal-based protein has fiber in it. Fiber is only found in plants. So most of us get not enough fiber in our days. So why not add in more plant-based protein? So that's my spiel about plant-based protein. So that's the second thing that I have out for protein. And then I also have some veggies. So I just have this big container of leafy greens. This is a mix of spring lettuce and baby spinach. You could also do just spinach, just kale, whatever. I like to buy it pre-packaged and pre-washed because then it's just grab and go. I don't have to think about it. I think about washing it. I don't have to wonder if it's getting moldy because I've just washed it or how much should I wash. It's a little bit more expensive that way, but then I don't waste any food, which is really important. So, but think about your own family and how you operate. If you like to buy it, the whole head of romaine lettuce, and you like to chop as you go, then that's fine too, and it's a little cheaper as well. All right, so I have the eggs, the corn tortillas, the hummus, I have oil, I have the spinach, and I have garlic powder and salt from when I was cooking the delicata squash. So this is going to go fast. So first I'm going to take a bowl and I'm going to whisk some eggs in it. And when I do that, it gets in a little bit of air. And I like getting, they tend to fluff up a little bit more eggs if you whisk them first. So that's why those can be helpful. So I'm going to do 4 eggs because this serves 2. I usually approximate about 2 eggs per serving. The reason why I'm warming it up in my hands is that these haven't been sitting out from the fridge for that long, only about 5 or 10 minutes. Usually when you're cooking with eggs, it's nice to have them sit out for a little bit to get up to closer to room temperature, just because they cook a little bit more uniformly. But not a big deal. We're just gonna crack them right in here. If you compost, you can compost eggshells. We don't have compost yet, but we're planning to soon. It's a great way to decrease carbon emissions because they don't produce methane in the landfill. Anytime you're working with raw animal products, you always want to rinse your hand before touching other utensils. That's important. So you can use a whisk. I'm just going to use a fork because if you don't have a whisk, you don't need one. So first what I like to do is just kind of smash the egg yolk to make sure that they're broken down a little bit. And then I just kind of, in a circular fashion, whisk this up. Again, some air is coming into this, so it's making it a little more fluffy. This is most important if you're going to make an omelet. We're not. You can also do a fried egg if you wish, so you can kind of keep the yolk intact. But that requires a little bit of finessing, especially if you're new to cooking eggs. So we're just going to scramble these babies up. Okay. Put this back. All right, so we have the eggs, and now what I'm going to do is I'm going to, on a medium skillet on the stove, I'm going to add in a little bit of oil. Oh, is that my timer? Okay, so we have 1 more minute before I'm going to flip over. My oven makes little cheerful sounds. It's kind of cute. So anyway, so I'm going to put some oil in the skillet, heat it to medium heat. I like the pan to get a little bit warm first before adding in the eggs so that I know they're going to just start cooking right away. And then with a spatula or any kind of cooking utensil, don't use metal. It should be plastic or silicone or something, especially if it's a non-stick pan. And you just want to kind of scramble them around. And then as those are cooking, right as they start to set, so they start to become a little bit more solid looking, then I'm going to add in the leafy greens because those will cook up and wilt very quickly. So I just want to make sure that they've cooked down a little bit, but they don't need to be cooking as long as the eggs. All right. So let's see. That's the timer for the delicata squash. I don't know if you can hear that sizzling. I want this So with a spatula, I'm just going to take these and I'm going to flip them over. Ooh, these look great. So some of them have browned a little bit more than others. And that's okay. They're warm to the touch, but they're not, they won't burn you, so if you need to use your fingers to flip, that's okay too. So again, they're browning, they're gonna kind of, what's called caramelizing, which is a reaction that the sugars in these starchy vegetables, they caramelize. So just like how sugar, when you're making caramel, caramelizes in the pan as it's brown, the sugars in vegetables will caramelize, and that's what brings out its sweetness. So I'm not saying it's like candy, but it is sweeter than if you were to just heat this in the microwave or boil them and eat it that way. So these need a little bit longer. These need about 15 minutes or so on the other side. So I'll start that timer. I'll bring my saute pan back over. And now I'm going to start with the eggs. So put in a little bit of oil. I keep forgetting that I have oil in that container. Let's go with this one. I would start with a teaspoon or so of oil and then see how well that kind of coats the pan. You just want to ensure that the eggs are notorious for sticking, and you want to ensure that they don't stick. So let's get this on medium heat. I'm going to toss this around. Again, I like to heat up the pan just a little. So it only really needs like 30 seconds or so, depending on how quick your stove is to heat, whether it's electric or gas. They all cook a little bit differently. You can tell if the pan is, if the oil is a little ready, because it will start to almost kind of like shimmer. You can also kind of put your hand over the top of it, just kind of see how warm it is. Other things that eggs have as this pan is heating up that I wanted to mention was they have choline, which is an important micronutrient, and choline is not found in a lot of other foods as much as eggs, and so that can be really good for kind of general overall health. In terms of the composition of the egg, the yolk is where the fat is, but it's also where a lot of the B vitamins are. The egg white is where the protein is. So if you're watching your fat intake, then you might want to just stick with one egg yolk and do the rest with egg whites. But in terms of your cholesterol, we think that the cholesterol found in foods does not directly translate to the cholesterol in your blood. So your blood cholesterol levels aren't affected by eggs as much. What they are affected by is saturated fat that we've talked about earlier. So I would say in terms of eggs, try to limit to a couple of eggs a day and try not to have them every day. But you don't need to worry so much about the cholesterol in the egg yolks. That's been kind of a hot topic recently and kind of confusing in the media. All right, so this seems, it's warm. So I've had this on medium heat, but I'm gonna now turn down to kind of medium low because I want them to not get super hard and fry up. I want them to still remain kind of creamy. Sometimes people will add milk to their eggs as another kind of creaminess factor, and you can do that. That would be fine, but I don't feel the need to do that in my eggs, because I think by whisking them and adding a little bit of air, they're fine. So now what I'm going to do is, because the pan was already hot, it's already starting to set a little bit. So I'll show you kind of what I'm looking at. So these are my eggs, and see, they've already kind of started to set. They almost make like little ribbons. And so I'm gonna wait until more of this looks like that. And then I'll add in the leafy greens. This should take about a minute to start to set a little bit. What I'm also going to do at this point is add in a little bit of the spices too. So a little bit of garlic. If you don't like garlic, that's fine. You don't need it. A little bit of salt. It's always good to add your own salt to foods. That's one of the great things about cooking at home, is that you know exactly how much of whatever ingredient it is that you're adding into your dish. So if you're worried about high blood pressure, hypertension, then it's good to look at how much salt you're adding to your dishes. Okay, so let me show you what I'm looking at as it's, what I mean by when it's starting to set. So this is what I'm looking at, where it's no longer runny in terms of kind of its liquid level, but it looks a little bit more set in its form. But they're not done yet for my liking. Some people like their eggs runny, and that's fine. The heat, can be dangerous to eat eggs raw because of the risk of salmonella, but as long as the yolk and the egg white have touched a hot surface for about 30 seconds or so, give or take, usually that's enough heat to decrease the risk of salmonella. So that's why people can have over easy eggs where the yolk is still runny, but it has been heated somewhat. So now these are a great consistency for me to add in the spinach and spring mix. Spring mix is a little odd to add to this, to be honest, but it cooks up fine. It just is what I had on hand. And I think that's a really important lesson in general, is just it doesn't have to be perfect. So if a recipe calls for spinach, but you have kale or you have another leafy green, usually they're all interchangeable. So even if it's not as popular to put it in, the taste and the nutrition should be the same. Now remember, leafy greens are excellent to cook down on as you're sauteing something at the end, because I put about a cup in there, and that is going to wilt down to about a quarter of a cup because all the water is coming out of it. So yes, it might look like a ton of volume on the pan, but it's going to wilt down beautifully, especially as you're mixing the egg over the spinach leaves to make sure that they're surrounded by the heat. So again, I'm still on medium low. And you can tell that the spinach is starting to wilt down. So then what I'm going to do is I'm going to demo one serving of this. So I'm gonna set this aside. So I'm gonna get out one plate. So again, this could be for breakfast, it could be for lunch, this could be for dinner, breakfast for dinner. It can be for any meal, I find, because the hummus makes it a little bit more savory, and so some people think of it as more lunch or a smaller dinner, but I've had it for breakfast as well. So what I'm going to do is that's still continuing to cook and wilt the spinach for another minute. I'm going to prepare the corn tortillas. So for a serving, I usually say go with about 2, depending on its size. And what I like to do to heat these up, because I like them warm, is I actually take a paper towel and I dampen it a little bit. So I kind of dampen it, get it all kind of slightly wet. And then I drape it over, and then I pop it in the microwave for about 15 seconds. And what that does is it doesn't allow the corn tortilla to dry up, because now it almost steams with the paper towel on top of it. But it's warm. So I'll nuke that once I feel like this is pretty much done. And it's looking very close. So I'm going to kind of show you what I'm looking at. Because again, I don't have a camera over here by my stove. Let's see. So you can see that this has wilted down incredibly. I mean, the pile of the spinach leaves was over the rim of this, and now it's wilted down. So that's just about done. So what I'm going to do is that to avoid it from overcooking, I'm going to just stop the heat. And if it's not electric, if it's gas or induction, you can kind of leave on the stove. If it's electric, you might want to kind of move it to the side so that it doesn't stay really hot on there. And I'm going to nuke this for about 15 seconds. And then I'm going to get a knife out because we're going to spread the hummus on top here. All right. Let me show you. And if you don't have a microwave, you can do 2 things. You can just have it heat up a little bit by the eggs that are going to go on it and not have the whole thing be very warm. Or you can put on a separate saute pan and just warm it up for about a minute on medium-low heat on another pan and warm it up on the stove. That's always another option. So I've taken the paper towel, tossed it aside. Now it's a little bit more pliable. It's kind of warm to the touch, but not super hot. And now I'm going to take a couple of tablespoons worth and spread the hummus on each one of these. And that's because it's a lot harder if you do it the other way around and you put the hummus after you put on the egg. So try to do this step first. You can put as much to your liking, but I would say 2 to 3 tablespoons worth is good. That's about a serving size. And that's it. So now I'm just going to top this. So this is going to be half of this mixture, right? Because the other half is for the other serving. It's about an egg per taco, 2 eggs, and 2 tacos per person. And there you have it. So you can just kind of fold it up there. Let me show you what I have. So you have your tortillas and you have the egg and your spices and a little bit of leafy greens. So We have the carbohydrate, the starch, we have the vegetable, and we have the protein. And you have a lot of fiber in here too. So, bon appetit. I hope you enjoyed. I also want you to see the final results of the Delicata squash, since they took another 5 to 10 minutes after we were done with the tacos. So let me show you what those will look like at the end. They've gotten nice and golden brown. You can see. So I don't know if you're able to see, but these are super brown and they've nicely caramelized. You can kind of hear them sizzling. So those are ready to eat either right away, or you can store them in a sealed container for a few days. But I think they are best eaten right away. But if you're going to top them on a burrito bowl or a salad, like a fall salad, then that's great too. And they would store it for a few days. All right, enjoy.